Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CANCAID's first webinar in the series for 2023, entitled Developing an Internal Quality Assurance Framework, Lessons Learned. I am Seamus Joseph, member of the Board of Directors and your chairperson and moderator for this evening's activity. As we open today's session, permit me to share our meeting protocols. We understand that you're very busy people and that you may receive telephone calls. However, I kindly request that cellular phones be silenced for minimal interruptions. Your microphones will be muted until the question and answer segment. During the session, you can also post your questions in the chat. Please ensure that you specify the issue to which your question refers. The raised hands icon will be acknowledged in the latter segments of the webinar. We are pleased to have all of you here with us today, including Mr. Curtis Floyd, Chairman, Mr. Jeremy Williams, Secretary, and other members of the CANCAID Board of Directors, our presenter, Dr. Greg Louis Austin, and peers in quality assurance of tertiary education and training. To begin today's proceedings, I invite Mr. Curtis Floyd to formally welcome you and to give opening remarks on behalf of CANCAID.
Thank you, Shilma, and good evening, colleagues in quality assurance and education. Let me first extend a happy new year to you all, as most of us would not have interacted at this level since last year. It is my distinguished pleasure to welcome you to the first of our webinars for 2023. It is also indeed heartening to see so many of you in attendance. Up to yesterday, actually, we had over 170 persons registered. So I'm seeing persons at least from Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, some other Caribbean countries, including our very own Trinidad and Tobago. So your presence here this evening is indicative of your commitment to self-development, institutional development, and your faith in and support of the work of CANCAID. For this, we express our sincere gratitude, as this is one of the indicators which provide the impetus for us to continue to forge ahead. I also extend my gratitude to those who contributed to bringing this evening's event to fruition. And this includes our CANCAID board members, our moderator, Shilma Joseph, and of course, our presenter for this evening, Dr. Greg Louis Austin. Dr. Greg Louis Austin, whom we fondly refer to as Greg, is no stranger to us, as he was honored previously as being CANCAID's ambassador. We look forward to him sharing his experience on developing an internal quality assurance framework, which, as educators and quality assurance advocates and practitioners, we are deeply aware of the importance this serves in the work that we do. As always, I encourage you to listen attentively, take your notes, and participate fully in our question and answer segment that follows. On conclusion of our very successful hybrid conference last November in beautiful Curacao, I communicated some countries that indicated interest in hosting upcoming conferences. This evening, the Secretary of CANCAID, Mr. Jeremy Williams, will be providing some insight into this year's conference, which I know some of you are eagerly anticipating and have been making inquiries on. Believe me, this year's host is a gem, and Your experience promises to be a memorable one. As was mentioned previously, this is the first webinar for 2023, with other events planned, and of which you will be informed in due course. Needless to say, we anticipate your continued participation and support. So, ladies and gentlemen, I trust that you will enjoy and benefit immensely from today's presentation, as I now defer to Ms. Shoma Joseph, who will introduce the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Floyd. I now invite Mr. Jeremy Williams, Secretary, to speak about the CanCade Conference 2023.
Thank you, Shoma. Good evening, colleagues. On behalf of the Board of Management, CanCade, and the local organizing committee, I have the pleasure of introducing our upcoming conference, the 19th Annual CanCade Conference, to be held on the 24th to the 27th of October, 2023, here in beautiful Trinidad and Tobago. The theme for this year's conference will be higher education quality and workforce development in the Caribbean: issues, challenges, opportunities, and solutions. It is a collaborative effort between the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago, and the National Training Agency. The sub-themes for the conference include employability and higher education quality, higher education quality and sustainable development, artificial intelligence or AI, higher education quality and workforce development, and higher education practices in a post-pandemic landscape. Attendees can look forward to speeches on issues related to AI in the higher education climate, flexible learning pathways in TVET and higher education, a panel discussion with educators, employers, HR professionals, and QA specialists, exhibits by educational institutions and companies involved in workforce development, and an open exhibit to students, including CanCade's own Footprints initiative. Those of us who will be attending the pre-conference workshop, which this year will take place on Tuesday, the 24th of October, will be treated to actually 2 workshops this time. In the morning, we will have a workshop on quality assurance in ODL, and in the afternoon, a half-day workshop on AI in higher education. I purposely left the cultural and social programs for last. Whilst in previous years, the conference has completed on a Friday, in this year, what we will be doing is the conference will begin on the Tuesday with a pre-conference workshop, continue on Wednesday and Thursday, and on the Friday, we are treating participants to a trip to Tobago for an extension of the cultural celebrations. For those who may not be aware, that weekend, Tobago will also be celebrating their carnival celebrations, which starts with Juve on Saturday and the Parade of the Bands on Sunday. On Friday, there will be a number of parties or fetes, as we call them in Trinidad and Tobago. And we are inviting participants to come for the conference, stay for the carnival. The call for papers will go out at the end of next week, and information on registration, including the cost of registration, identifiable hotels, and otherwise, will also be published on the CanCade website within the next week. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the conference in October.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Come for the conference, stay for the carnival. And now for the focus of the evening. It is my pleasure to introduce our specially invited guest. Dr. Greg Louis Austin is an educational quality assurance professional who currently serves as the Academic Standards and Quality Assurance Officer in the Caribbean Military Academy of the Jamaica Defense Force. Prior to this, he served in several capacities at the University of Technology, Jamaica, culminating in the position of Associate Vice President, Quality Assurance. Dr. Austin, as you heard before, is no stranger to CanCate, having been the 2019 to 2022 CanCate Ambassador and Ethely London Scholarship recipient. He holds, among other things, a PhD in Educational Leadership and Management, a double master's degree in Health Informatics and Healthcare Management, and a BSc in Management. He has been conferred the award of Fellow of the Institute for Educational and Administrative Leadership of Jamaica, and has had over 10 years experience in quality assurance. Dr. Austin has a passion for quality assurance, educational leadership and management, academic advisement, online learning, and health informatics, and has presented papers in these areas at international, regional, and local conferences. Help us to welcome Dr. Austin.
Thank you very much, Sharma. Good evening, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be presenting at this CanCate webinar. I must thank you for the opportunity to be sharing with you just a little of what I have learned over the years. And I want to point out that this presentation will attempt to just share some of that information over the past approximately 12 years, spanning two not so similar higher education institutions. I must especially acknowledge Curtis, and also I want to say hello to June, who was the person who called me and the person who I can't really say no to. And so I thank you for the opportunity. I also want to especially acknowledge those of my colleagues who are supporting me in attending the conference and the webinar here, and those who also helped me with some information that I needed, very critical information, in just cementing and confirming what I will present today. Developing an internal quality assurance framework, lessons learned. So it would be remiss of me to not highlight at this point that I think all of us realized and learned some very, very quick lessons over the past, let's say, 3 years with the, should I say, the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I don't know that I could not make mention of that, because we saw an entire change, an entire revolution, if we can call it that, of the internal quality assurance landscape, as I think we all, one way or another, literally overnight, tried to grapple with the protocols that came as a result of the pandemic. And so I want to point out very clearly that that also plays a factor in what I will present today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and take it from there. Are you still hearing me, and are you seeing the screen properly?
Yes,
Beautiful. I'll crack on then. So for the outline, I'm going to be looking at just some operational parameters, just some conversations that surround internal quality assurance. And then I'll be looking briefly at the importance of IQE. Then I'll be sharing some lessons learned and providing some recommendations. And so as we go into a discussion, a conversation about internal quality assurance, we will have to also look at or mention at minimum external quality assurance framework as well. And so as we look at that discussion, we also can't help but thinking about what obtains with a sort of dichotomy between internal quality assurance framework and external quality assurance framework. What I mean by that is, originally, there was the conversation that it's one or the other, or one versus the other. So quality assurance in higher education systems comprise of both internal and external quality assurance frameworks. And so there has to be that balance. It is important to note, though, that over the past few years, the implementation of internal quality assurance in higher education was not fully in practice, I would say, when compared to the external quality assurance activities. This is evident, or this was evident, when one examines the institutional focus and culture, even as it related, for example, to accreditation. So there was this, or there is still in some areas, programmatic accreditation, for example, and that, to my mind, in my opinion, and from my experience, saw a heavy reliance on the standards promulgated by the accreditation agency, in our case in Jamaica, the UCJ, setting the sort of tone for the QA activities in the institutions. What this resulted in is that institutions focus heavily on external quality assurance concepts and practices. And as the era of institutional accreditation became more prominent, what happened was that you realize a sort of shift, because what now happened was that higher education institutions had the awesome responsibility of providing the accreditation agency proof, evidence, some assurance that there is a robust internal quality assurance framework within these institutions. And so the sort of traditional tension that perhaps existed between internal and external quality assurance, and the sort of either or sort of culture that was there, I think gave way to one where you realize that they're actually complementary. In ensuring that you have a robust internal quality assurance system, you realize that this was bolstered by the standards and expectations of our accreditation bodies, of our agencies that are there to assure standards, of our of some other, what should I say, stakeholders or partners in our education system who have a responsibility to ensure that the quality of our academic delivery is paramount and is on point. And so what resulted is that it moved from a versus into a one where you combined both of them. I want to also shift the conversation regarding internal quality assurance to one that speaks to culture, compliance, and consistency. And these 3 C's, as outlined by Cardosa et al. In 2019, are critical elements in IQA framework of any higher education institution anywhere in the world. Having a robust IQA is critical to engendering a quality of a culture of quality, not only in the QA offices and named QA spaces, but also just across every operational space in the institution. What has to happen is that this sort of culture has to reside with just about everybody. The support systems, whether it is the academic management areas, the academic delivery for sure, academic support, student services, facilities management, you name it, the IQA robust test is a test that is administered to everybody in the institution. And so that culture is not only limited to QA persons, to QA officers, for example, and so on, and standards officers. It filters across everywhere, and an internal QA framework is one that assures that. And then there's a compliance bit of it to ensure that on a daily basis, every task, every event, every activity is one that is compliant, and that's the way you achieve compliance overall. It cannot be a half and half. It cannot be a situation where one person is doing it, one department is compliant and the others aren't, right? And so we'll have to also ensure that right across the board, compliance is evident. And then there is consistency, doing the right thing all the time, doing the correct thing all the time, doing the good thing all the time. And so internal quality assurance systems are bolstered by these 3 C's: culture, compliance, and consistency. Then there is a conversation that surrounds internal quality assurance systems, whether they are control systems or whether they are systems of improvement, whether it is that there is the situation where one would think that, hey, it is a little bit too controlling, you are stifling certain other activities. But what I would want us to think about is that there has to be a level of control, even for there to be improvement. There has to be that level of control that is not stifling, that is not bureaucratic, that does not negate innovation and creativity and flexibility and adaptability, but one that sets guidelines and sets standards for there to be growth and continuous improvement. And so internal quality assurance systems, or an internal quality assurance framework, is so designed, or must be so designed, to ensure that there is the level of control that facilitates improvement. So as we go ahead and think about internal quality assurance systems, we want to be thinking improvement. We want to be thinking that control level of control, right? So to ensure that there is a measured level of control, to ensure that growth takes place, to ensure that improvement takes place, to ensure that the mistakes that we make today, those mistakes we don't make tomorrow, because we would have learned from them in that sort of controlled environment. Now, how we derive a workable definition for internal quality assurance systems or framework, or internal quality assurance in general. Now, as you would imagine, you Google it, or you go on Google Scholar, you go into the literature about this, and you'll find a myriad of definitions. What I would like to share, at least adapt for this, is a working definition out of a study done by the Ministry of Education in Ukraine. And I chose this one because it is simple and it is one that we can, I think, all relate to. And it speaks to processes and procedures within institutions to review, evaluate, assess, or otherwise check, examine, or ensure the quality of the education offered or delivered, right? And so when we sort of dissect this definition, there are some phrases, there are some words, there are some terms that jump at us that I would not even say are common to internal quality assurance, but are important as we seek to understand what it is. So keywords such as processes, procedures, other action words, review, reviewing, evaluation, assessing, examination, are all terms that could be used when we look at it for external quality assurance framework or for quality assurance framework in general. But why this working definition, I think a workable definition is chosen, is as we look at the word within, these are processes and procedures that ought to be derived from within the institutions, processes and procedures that we will have to sit and look at as institution and within our organizations to ensure that we can find a workable definition, because the internal quality assurance framework that works for University X may not work for University Y. And having now worked across 2 or 3 higher education institutions, I'm realizing that, right? Everybody has the same outlook, yes, to provide quality education and training and so on through research and scholarly activities. But IQA is sort of individualistic as you seek to look at what is it you want to do, and then IQA helps you to define the how. How are you going to achieve this objective? How are you going to execute this mission? And how are you going to achieve this vision of whatever your organization has set? And so IQA becomes very individualistic and becomes very institutional, so to speak, because there are a number of things you have to look at. So as we now look at that and look at the lessons that we have learned, just quickly wanting to point out the importance of IQA. And I won't spend long on this. It facilitates standardization. You would want to know that across your education spaces and across your academic units, whatever they are, whether you call them colleges, whether you call them faculties, whether you call them departments, whether you call them units, whatever they are called, you want to ensure that there is standardization across. The way that evaluation is done in faculty X is the way it is done in faculty Y. And when I say the way it is done, I know persons are probably saying, but no, there are certain things that are peculiar to certain industries. There are certain things that are peculiar to certain training. So for example, the way you evaluate a nursing student is going to be definitely different from the way you evaluate a business student, for example. But what about those, the standards that are there? What about what you intend to achieve at the end? So you're hoping to train the best nurse, you're hoping to train the best accountant, right? You're hoping to train the best engineer, right? And so you'll have to look at what goes into that, because you will now have to look at the how, the methodology to ensure that that is standardized. Also, if we look at another important, it allows for performance monitoring. It provides that sort of framework for you to monitor what is happening. It provides for you those benchmarks, so to speak, those yardsticks, those measuring points as you seek to monitor what is going on. And then for sure, it facilitates continuous quality improvement. And this is very, very important as we speak to this, because as I pointed out earlier, the aim of IQA is to improve, to ensure that the mistakes you made yesterday are not made today and are not made tomorrow. Right? It's not so complex. It's kind of simple, actually, when you look at it. So it facilitates continuous quality improvement, and day by day, as you seek to not only now try to improve on or try to avoid or mitigate against some wrong things that you did, or try to improve on that, but also to make the good better. And the better best. And so you end up with best practices out of that, because that's what your IQA is all about. Now, as we crack on, we look at the lessons learned. Lesson number one for me was that you have to understand the specific educational environment. Now, as I moved from institution to institution, I realized that, things are different. And I had the opportunity to have a very learned supervisor, manager, my VP currently, to whom I report. One of the first things she said to me was, you will have to take off the hat of that place from which you are coming and just forget that you were even there, because this place is a totally different place. And that for me was a lesson with an extremely steep learning curve, understanding the specifics of that educational environment. You have to know what the place is about. You have to learn very quickly and understand very quickly. Through whatever method, through an analysis, through your being dictated to, through your being told, through your own research and realization as the days go by that, oh, this is how this is done here, right? Now, whether or not you plan to turn things around and whatever, that's fine. But you first have to understand some specifics about that space, right? To ensure that you have an effective IQA, right? Have to, must, right? Because you have to ensure that you do that. Now, understand the specific educational environment. Know, for example, how things are done. Have an understanding of the academic delivery modalities, of the assessment modalities. Have an idea of the level at which the faculty, the lecturers, the instructors operate. You have to also understand very quickly what is the support system like, right? Before you go ahead and do that, because as I said before, it is individualistic. I could not have taken the IQA framework from University X, where I was coming from, to bring it to University Y, where I now am. It just would not work. And even certain elements, when I would come now with my very, my very bright self, oh, I've done this at a university, at a place and a space that is larger and more established than where I am now. And so, yes, here I come, my bright self. No, just don't do that. Just don't try to understand what is happening where you are in that space. Also, you have to understand what obtains in terms of structure. And I will start very basic with the QA structure. First of all, you have to even look at the reporting structures of the QA officers and standards officers and the structure as it pertains to that unit, whether you call it an Office of Quality Assurance, whether you call it a Quality Assurance Unit, a Quality Assurance Department, a Standards Unit, a Standards and Quality Assurance Department, whatever it is, you have to also know that structure, because you now have to be able to manipulate that structure in ensuring that you have an effective IQA, right? You'd have to know what the support system is like. You have to know in terms of structure, how it is and what it is, what the roles and responsibilities are of the QA personnel or QA officers, QA staff, whatever they are called. You also have to look at the structure of how some other things are done. How is program development done? What's the structure for it? Do you have a defined structure? Does it take a year in this space, or does it take 3 months? What is the rigor like? What is the sort of robustness? Are you going to be subjected to a committee, a board, or whatever it is called in your space, a board, a committee, a panel? And what is the rigor like? If you're going to present a letter of intent or a proposal to offer a new course of study, what is the rigor like? What is the structure like? What are the steps that we'll have to go through? On all of that has to be known, because you would at least, or at minimum, want to have an idea of the time frame you're working with, because all of these things affect the robustness of your internal quality assurance framework. So that is very, very important. What structures obtained in terms of your evaluation? How does that go? What exactly is in place? What systems are in place? What instruments are there to assess? And what is the structure that pertains, and what is the culture it is that supports that structure? Is it that it is very student-centric, and you can actually map decision making to student feedback, or the other way around, yeah, map student feedback to the decision making? Or it is that you're in a space where, hey, the students are seen as not so much the very important people, and they're a set of very learned persons in a particular space that makes a decision in a silo. What are all of those things you have to know? And that was another lesson that was learned as I worked in those QA spaces over that period of time. Thirdly, it is very important that there is the policy environment, developing a policy. And this is important because there needs to be a reference point, a documented reference point, as you, for IQA, especially. EQA is not so bad, because you would have gotten those standards and those reference points documented from whatever organization or agency that influence, right, or that dictates the culture of that external quality assurance environment. But within your organization, right, you need to develop your own reference point. So there needs to be a QA policy. And it's very, very important that one is developed. So developing a QA policy is another lesson that was learned, because you must be able to point to something. You must be able to refer to a document. This is the policy. This is how we define quality in this space. These are our quality imperatives. These are our quality principles. Our focus is on fitness for purpose, for example. right? Or our focus is on transformation as a QA principle. And that has to be, it is very, very important that that is done, because some other things that go on will depend on that, right? And once that policy is developed, once you have that reference point, once you have that documentation, you have gone a far way in setting the stage, in setting a platform, right, for which to build your internal quality assurance framework. So that is very, very important. And then you also develop standard operating procedures for your QA processes, right? And I would not even say, I wouldn't even limit it down that I'm thinking that is not only for QA processes, but for generally for your academic processes, right? And your training processes across the institution, develop standard operating procedures. And what this allows for is a continuation, right, of a process that over time, as you improve, will become a best practice, right? And so it is very important that your SOPs are documented so persons can refer to them, whether it's in the form of a manual, whether you call them SOPs, whether you call them manuals, whether you call them training directives, whatever they are, you have to now ensure that you develop your standard operating procedures, and that as you develop those support your policy position. All right. So this is what the overarching policy says, and these are the standard operating procedures that support, right, or that emanate from the policy. The policy is overarching. It does not tell you much in terms of specifically telling you how something is done. So the policy, for example, will tell you that the evaluation of the lecturers or the instructors is very important, and it is important because of, right? Good. But the standard operating procedures will now say, this is how lecturers are evaluated in this space. All right. And that is very, 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 very important, because, and this will assist in the standardization that we hope to achieve, right, as we make our internal quality assurance framework robust, right? Once there is an SOP that's documented, you hand it and you say, this is how things are done in this space, whether you are from faculty X, whether you're from faculty Y, whether you're from unit X, whether you're from unit Y, this is how things are done in this space. And lastly, you have to ensure that you maintain the link with what is happening outside, right? You can't just be in a silo. You can't just be developing internal quality assurance framework and systems independent of what is happening, of how the bigger picture looks. Because one of the outputs of an internal quality assurance framework or system is that you want to ensure that you are able to meet some EQAs, you're able to meet some standards that are set by some governing body, that by some accreditation body, by some licensing body, by some certification body. Good. And so we have to ensure that that is done. Good. So it is very, very important that as you link your IQA to your EQA, also what comes into play also is a link to what is happening in the industry. Because more often than not, the EQA is defined, or the EQA defines for us what is happening in the industry landscape. So for example, for us in education, the EQA would already embody what is happening in the education landscape. Good. If you're training persons for the military, right? The EQAs would tell you what military education looks like in Canada, right? Right? In the UK, in the US, right? And so your internal quality assurance, there has to be some mapping to that. There has to be some link to that, right? And there must be the understanding that these two have to be linked, right? And that's another lesson, very, very important, very, very critical lesson that must be learned. So those are the lessons, in summary, right, that we have to look at. Ensure you understand your educational environment, ensure that you are conversant with the structure, culture, support systems that exist within the organization, that you develop a QA policy, a reference point, good, that you develop attendant to that policy or those policies, could be more than one, depending on how you look at it, or standard operating procedures, so that there is standardization, that across the institution, things are done properly, things are done of a particular quality, and things are done basically in the same way. So if you improve as an organization. It's not necessarily the case where one unit is doing well and the other unit is not doing well. Your SOPs provide for there to be the continuous quality improvement of the entire organization, of the entire institution, everybody stepping up because you're guided by those documents. And lastly, ensure that you don't close your eyes to what is happening outside. You have to know what's happening out there as you develop your IQAs. Now, as I close, good. As I close, the recommendations, and they are mapped to the lessons learned. Execute situation analysis. Ensure that you benchmark if possible. But what this is simply saying is that you understand your space. All right, that's a recommendation. Ensure that you understand your space. Do the situation analysis, whether it is SWOT, whether it is any of the others, right? Whether or not you are going to be looking at other spaces, whether you're going to be benchmarking, just ensure that you do that. You want to look at what your competitor is doing, or you want to look at what other persons in your space is doing, probably not competitor. Perhaps you are you have a monopoly, a monopolistic position in the industry, in your space. You are the only, for example, military education training agency. You're the only military academy in Jamaica, as in the case of where I am. And so you would benchmark perhaps with against Royal Military College, right? Or a Sandhurst. Those are academies in Canada, the UK, USA, right? So you'd want to look at that and ensure that you understand the situation analysis will allow for you to not only understand what's happening in your space, but what's happening in other spaces similar to yours. Employ structures based on your resources. So don't hang your baskets beyond where you can reach them, right? Be very real, be very pragmatic about this. Look at what your space, what is happening in your space, and take time to build your IQA. It is something that happens over time, and it is dynamic. It is not something that you can say, all right, I have reached this point and my IQA is now of a particular quality. I can kick back and relax and, no, always improving, yeah, always moving. There's always a new standard. There's always something new on the horizon. I mean, look at what COVID taught us. Who would think that we'll be having a Concave conference that's blended, that's online, that's Who would have thought that? I mean, we all perhaps used to look forward to, you know, buying our ticket, jumping on a plane, going somewhere, and that's it. But now, so it keeps moving. Yeah, it's a moving target. So you have to employ those structures based on your resources. Yes, and be very real about this. Don't fool yourselves, right? Just ensure that you look at what you have, you look at what you can be supported this time, and everything can be done at once. Yes, you have to ensure that you, in a very methodical way, look at what can be done today and do that today. Forecast as to what can be done tomorrow, and do not try to do what has to be done tomorrow, today. Develop an overarching policy, right? Policies are just broad, general guidelines, right? And ensure that that is done, and then ensure that you have supporting, and I put documented there. Persons have SOPs in their heads and in their brains. Yes, man. They have some gurus at this thing. You ask them how it is done, you wake them up, or sometimes even in them sleep, they reel off a process. Bap, 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 this, then this, then this. Even when they're not so sober, right? Any state to catch them in, they're able to tell you. But hey, it's not documented anywhere. So yes, it is happening. The processes are happening, and you see some semblance of them happening. You can perhaps prove at an end that they're happening because you see the output. But hey, you need to have them documented, especially because you are going to need that for evidence, and you're going to need that to ensure that you achieve standardization. Right? And lastly, my very last recommendation is that, and it's not coming up, or don't say it's freezing now. This is not good. Good, it's here. That you engage in quality improvement activities. IQA is not about putting on blinders and ensuring that you're so focused about doing this that you are closing out what is going on around you. You don't allow for the influences of the environment to play a role. It will not work, and you will not perhaps improve the way you're supposed to improve, because what is going to happen is that you are going to limit the improvement process. Continuous quality improvement activities are some that ensure that everything happens, and whatever happens is happening all the time, and there's some consistency to it. And that's my final recommendation. As I wrap up that, I hope the lessons that I learned over the period that I've shared are lessons that you can now use and take to either initiate or strengthen or improve your internal quality assurance systems in your space. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. These are my references, or some of them at least.
Thank you very much, Dr. Austin. At this juncture, we will now open the floor to you. You may ask your questions or share your feedback using the chat feature. When writing a question, please ensure that you specify the issue to which the question refers, or indicate your engagement by selecting the Reactions tab, then clicking on the Raise Hand icon. When called upon, your microphone will be unmuted, and you may proceed to engage our guests, being mindful to ask precise questions, thus ensuring that we entertain as many participants as possible within the time allotted. Participant feedback shall be placed in the chat and entered into the feedback form that will be circulated. In the event that there are questions that cannot be answered because of time constraints, these will be addressed and sent to the registered participants via email. So you can jump right in, raise your hand if you have a question. to get the ball rolling then, I have,
Go ahead.
okay, go ahead. I have a question for Dr. Austin. In your experience, having been to a number of different types of organizations and so on, working in quality assurance, what is the largest tension largest tension between IQA and EQA?
Thank you very much for that question, Sharma. What I realized is that the largest tension is the feeling by some persons within the institution or the organization that, you know, here is an agency, a body, an organization, even though having the right to do so or the authority to do so, but sort of imposing on us certain things that they perhaps know, or at least that's the thinking, that are not quite achievable. So I've heard questions or persons within the organization ask questions like, or make statements like, they clearly have not worked in a university before. They don't understand the size of the university. I wonder if they are sure that they know that this is a young university or this is this type of university. And so that tension of not accepting this as a standard, as a point, and set it as a goal, treating it as something you must now work towards or strive towards achieving, but instead looking at it as something that is so restrictive or something that is so pressuring, or even thinking that, you know, the persons who are in these agencies just don't understand, you know, that this information is not information that we think is necessary for them to know at this point. And so I realized that there is this sort of, you know, this sort of a defensive sort of attitude with persons within the organization when it comes to, you know, these agencies that have the responsibility to define what the EQA environment is, a sort of pushback from them. It's not accepted to say, all right, this is what is required. Let us see if we can meet it. And if we meet it 60% today, we meet it 70% tomorrow, we meet it 80% the next day. But taking that approach, so the tension is that sort of defensive attitude towards that. And very often, if I can go beyond the question of what the tension is to how I think it can be mitigated.
That's my next question.
Okay, so I can go ahead then. Right. So what we find happening is that the persons in the QA spaces, the quality assurance officers and personnel, standards officers, and so on, what we find happening is that we are now caught between the rock and the hard place. So we have to be the mediators to say, all right, we understand that these are the standards. We understand that these are the requirements from the agency. We understand that these are the components of the EQA. And what we now will have to do within the organization is champion some activities and ensure that we develop a culture within the organization where persons will appreciate that, hello, this is the standard within the industry, right? It's not only here that it is required, but every other space similar to ours across the world. This is how this is done, and getting them now to understand and bringing them up to that part to say, this is what is acceptable, and this is how we are going to achieve that. So there's no need to be defensive necessarily. What we have to do is to channel that energy into finding ways, right, of developing, improving our IQA to sort of meet the standards of the EQA.
That so the onus therefore is from your answer there is some action on the part of the institution internally.
Yes.
But from the institutional perspective, what would you say to the EQA? We say EQAA. What would you say to the EQA to help you do that and mitigate against that tension? The External Quality Assurance Agency from an institution, what would you require from the EQA to tame that raging storm?
Of course, most of the times, the agencies, I find in my experience, there's a level of understanding. There's a level of understanding. And once you can prove to them that some effort is being made to meet the particular standards, once I think you're able to prove to them that, listen, we are treating this as a working target. We, first of all, will have to say, yes, we acknowledge that this is what you have set, right, as the agency with the authority to develop those standards. But as an organization, these are, as an institution, internally, these are the challenges that we're experiencing. But I think what it takes is a commitment to improve your position, to meet at some point those standards that are set. Your mic is muted though.
Okay, right, wasn't unmuting for some reason. Yes, your answer reflected a conversation I had recently with a foreign partner, and talking about criteria and standards from the External Quality Assurance Agency as aspirational, that the institution can work to over time, surpassing, and that sort of thing. Yes, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. What I am, June, I'm seeing Mr. Palmer has his hand up. Mr. Palmer, please, I will unmute you and you can wait 1 second. Can someone unmute Mr. Palmer?
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're hearing it.
Thank you. Thank you. I must thank the hosts for such a very informative session. And the question that I have is perhaps a combination of comments and a question at the same time. But I would first like to start with introducing myself. My name is Ambrose Palmer. I am the principal of micro corporate training in Trinidad. Actually, the previous discourse sort of dovetail into the question of detention. My question really relates to the concern with limited resources, particularly for small institutions such as myself. And it really relates to the previous discourse in that, how can one with limited resources be, for want of a better word, accommodated, which they probably may have 100% interest in meeting quality assurance and standards, but the criteria has a certain requirement or certain requirements. And perhaps that institution may not be able to meet these requirements in the way that they may have been laid out. What kind of accommodations, for want of a better word, that can be put in place to assist or to encourage such institutions to meet those criteria?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I must start off with a disclaimer. I said, I'm not quite sure that I'm able to answer the question, but this is what I'll say, because I think this question is one that ought to be posed to persons on the other end, on the EQA side. I'm on the IQA side as a culture assurance officer within that institution. But the scarcity of resources is a real one, and it is not common only to small or smaller institutions, even though, of course, by virtue of funding mechanisms and so on, I think by and large, some smaller institutions are a little bit more stretched than some larger ones. But I'm not quite sure that I can speak to the accommodation by the EQA. The EQAs would have to now tell us how they can be accommodated. But having had some of those challenges, or having experienced some of those challenges, I can perhaps relate to an instance or two where that happened. And how I will answer that is what we did internally as the institution to facilitate what I could refer to, as you put it, as an accommodation by the EQA. Number one, it required us at that point to be very honest and real in outlining what our position was at the time, right? We do not have this in place. You say we do not have this in place, right? Of course, when you're writing these documents, self-studies and so on, that's not quite how you put it. So instead of saying, for example, that you don't have a lecture theater that can accommodate a full cohort at the same time, then you would now say, we don't schedule classes to, for example, to have all the cohorts sitting. So we would have to now have smaller groups because that is what the space can afford. Yes, the ideal, perhaps economically and otherwise, is to train persons of like manner in one space, because you save money that way. I mean, at minimum, if you're supposed to be hiring at least 2 lecturers or paying 1 lecturer twice to do the same lecture, then you can understand at minimum the sort of cost implication. So I think where the trouble comes in is where our reporting does not match the practice, right? And then we get in trouble. So we would write things like lectures are being done in the lecture hall and there's a full sitting of the group and those sort of things. But it makes no sense for you to do that if that's not the practical case. And what I find is that once you point out what your limitations are and how you manage those limitations, right? And prove that even within an environment of scarcity of resource, you have put things in place to maintain a particular quality, I find that it is accommodating. Now, of course, if it is something way out. So I remember, for example, one of the last things was that the whole area of yes, good. Practical example. In ensuring that you accommodate diverse student populations. If I'm supposed to highlight an example of the special abilities communities. So something as simple as they're saying that if you have more than one story, 2, 3 upward story buildings, you ought to have a lift, right, to take persons who may be users of wheelchairs. Now, if you already had the building years ago, that it would cost you more to put in an elevator than to perhaps make a new building with a lift, right? Because perhaps in order to put in the elevator in the old building, you would have to renovate and strengthen the entire building. It's like building a new one. Now, what you could simply do is demonstrate that, listen, from this point onwards, it is our plan that for the buildings that we're going to build going forward, there is a plan, a developmental plan, whatever, that will have that. But not only that, for the buildings that exist, you ensure that the common spaces on the ground floor have that, and that you ensure that there is a lecture room, at least one on the ground floor. And you ensure that the schedulers and the timetablers now are careful to ensure that persons with these special needs are accommodated in classrooms and in spaces on the ground floor. Demonstrate that all your academic management spaces, your student offices, your faculty offices, and so on, are on the ground floor of the buildings and so on. These are ways, and I find that once you are able to ensure that, listen, we have these limitations, but this is what we do to ensure that quality is maintained, there's a certain level of accommodation. I sincerely hope that helped, Ambrose.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. We now have a question from the last question from Dr. June Wheatley-Holness.
Oh, okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that really informative presentation, Dr. Austin.
Nice.
My question is, well, during your presentation, you indicated how important it is to have a quality culture. So my question is, how do you go about developing a quality culture within an institution?
Huh? Can I start by saying it is hard? And can I also second that by saying that it takes time? It doesn't happen overnight, and I think the simplest way to do it is to try, first of all, to get persons to understand that everything they do affects the quality of the output. And by that, I mean, number one, we have to ensure that persons understand that, hey, I may not be a lecturer or an instructor. However, as one of the ancillary workers who has the responsibility to ensure that the space, the learning space, the physical learning space, is conducive to learning just by it being clean, and just by it being clean, yes, and just by it smelling good, for example. And if across the organization, everyone understands that what I do affects the very image of this space. What I do affects the quality of the students that are being trained. I am never, ever going to stand before a group of students and teach them anything. But if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, nobody would be able to stand before the students, because that learning activity is going to be affected negatively because I didn't do something I'm supposed to do. Getting persons to understand that what I do is important and is important enough to contribute to the quality of education that is offered in this space is extremely critical. And then going beyond that, ensuring that persons understand that doing the right thing first and every time after that is important is another way to go in developing a culture of quality. And of course, lastly, if you have a system that rewards quality, that goes a far way. If you can tie your quality system to a reward system of promotion, of increments on salaries, whatever, that goes a far way in ensuring that over time you build a quality culture in your institutions. Of course, the flip side to that is too that you have to ensure that substandard activities and activities that don't match up to the quality, that there is some not only punishment really, but some developmental plan in place to ensure that those activities or those persons now understand that, listen, this is where you go to improve on the quality of what you do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Austin. And thank you everyone for your participation. Even people asking about the recording. The recordings are found on the CanCate YouTube channel. So, you know, it's there. You can go up and download it and for your edification. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of CanCate's first webinar in the series for 2023. I am sure that this was a great refresher or some new information for some persons. And this included the internal or external quality assurance framework, the tensions are changing over time, to complementary systems, to systemic cultural consistency rather than compliance solely, controlled improvement, key elements of an IQA, process, procedures, reviewing, evaluation, standardization of units, performance monitoring, and evaluation. There was also the importance of fitness for purpose and understanding context versus conceptualization, development of SOPs, and linkages between the IQA and the EQA to ensure systemic change. Today will not be complete without acknowledging those who made this event possible. So on behalf of CanCate, I would like to express our sincerest gratitude to our speaker, Dr. Greg Louis Austin. Thank you for your generous contribution of your time, knowledge, and willingness to facilitate this webinar, and for sharing your experiences with us this evening. I trust that the representatives of post-secondary and tertiary education institutions will implement the points discussed today. To our participants, a heartfelt thank you for making the effort to be virtually present and for being an attentive audience. We appreciate your dedication and the time that you invest to continuously improve the quality of education in the Caribbean region. I also thank the staff, the members of the board and those who played supporting roles in planning or contributing to this event. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure being your chairperson and moderator. I wish you good night and we look forward to the next webinar.
Thank you very much.